Hello, Lydia. Thank you so much for joining me on the She Leads Me podcast. I am so excited to talk to you today and introduce our audience to you. Thanks for being here. It's so great to meet you in person, or virtually, I should say.
Thank you, Heather. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, I am, as I just was explaining before we hit record, a huge fan, have read the book. My sweet gran sent me the book, and I've just been following you ever since and love your message and what you have to say, and is so relevant to our audience here. And I'm just thrilled to put a mic and to this conversation, and so that we can share your brilliance with them and have them connect with you and read the book and just have this, work out well for everybody all around.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. So before we get into some of the things that I've kind of pulled out of the book that I want to talk about, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do to our audience?
So my name is Lydia Fenet. I am a global managing director for Christie's Auction House based in New York City. And that's one part of my job. But the job that the book is really based on is the other part of my job, which I like to think of as the fun part of my job. So I'm a charity auctioneer for Christie's, which means that I go on stage late at night in New York, or frankly anywhere in the world, and sell things that nobody wants to raise money for charity. So at 11 o'clock at night, I'm the person who gets on stage to try to sell you a puppy that you have no intention of buying.
Yeah.
With enough encouragement and maybe a glass of wine or two, I can really help inspire you to give as much as you possibly can. So I wrote a book called The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, based off of my experience as an auctioneer, teaching women how to sell themselves and how to really use their confidence and become confident in their voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell us about that transition into that job. How fascinating. We're also not talking about like just a little bit of money. You have helped raise $25 million in revenue. Is that correct?
I've raised in the past 16 years over $500 million.
$500 million. Oh my gosh. So yes, that is amazing and incredible. So we're not talking a small chunk. You got into auctioneering and then have become wildly successful at it. How did you get into it? Tell us a little bit about that journey for you in your career.
Well, I started working at Christie's right out of college. I had interned there between my junior and senior year, essentially based on the fact that I read an article about the auction world. My parents were not art collectors. I didn't realize that there was an auction world, but I read an article about Princess Diana's dresses being sold to benefit charity at this place called Christie's Auction House. And so, as I often do in my life, I start telling people that I want to do something years before it actually happens or there's even an opportunity. And in this case, most everybody was just sort of, they looked at me quizzically because they'd never heard of Christie's Auction House either. And again, believe it or not, I'm sure because you're looking at me, you would never believe this, but I am not, I was not in college at a time when the internet was really a thing. Barely existed, I'll put it there. So
Wow,
Google
yeah.
was not really a place that you were hopping on to research.
Sure.
It was really something that was word of mouth. And through a small random chance encounter with a woman who was an assistant at Christie's Auction House, I was able to get the card for the internship coordinator and essentially stalked her until I got a job. It happened, but just sheer force of will.
Mm-hmm.
And I essentially interned there, and then I went right back after college and interned again until I got full-time offer. And when I was working there at the beginning, I was working in the events department. And so all of the requests for auctioneers would come into our department, and we would accompany the auctioneers to take these charity auctions. And this was really my first glimpse at New York after hours. I was young, I was making no money. I was living in a fifth floor walk up, and we would go out to these extravagant galas that you cannot even imagine, where everyone's in black tie and the men are in black tie and the women are in these gorgeous gowns. And this is New York 20 years ago, so people really dressed up. Yeah. And at the end of the auction, at the end of the night, where people were talking about the charity, and then people who were receiving funds from the charity would get up and talk about it, we would have an auctioneer who would get on stage. And at that point, the charity auctioneers really didn't care that much about the job because it wasn't really taken that seriously. It was sort of like, throw Bob up there because he's had 5 glasses of wine and he can just call his friends out until they give money. It really was a very sort of, gentleman's club, fun, bombastic.
Sure.
But really the expectations for the revenue that they were raising were quite small. And flash forward about 5 years, they allowed anyone in the company to try out to be an auctioneer. And so I had seen enough of these happen that I knew what it was supposed to look like. And I went into those survivor-like tryouts where you start with 20 people and they whittle you down over 4 days until there are 4 people left. And at the end, I was the only woman. And I was probably 10, 15 years younger than most of the guys I was trying out with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the other person who made it was a guy. And then there were 2 other guys who were both British. So everything I ever thought about being an auctioneer was summed up in that. And because I didn't look anything like the auctioneers, they just sort of said that day, we don't really know what we're going to do with you. You definitely have something, but we'll just send you to the auctions that nobody else wants to take. And that was all it took.
The rest was history. And then when you went to those auctions, did you find that there was some sort of barrier there because of the age and just being a woman on stage, that at that point women weren't being no one was doing that. So did you feel it at that point too?
Absolutely. I had all these jokes, and it's so funny now when I look back. I think humor has always been my defense mechanism against situations that I feel are unjust, or, I think at that point I wasn't even really thinking about it. It was just really the way the world was, right?
Sure.
I would walk in as a young woman and I would get a comment akin to, oh, well, we'll just put you at the kids' table. Or, well, honey, don't have a glass of wine before the auction. And all of these little things that no one would ever have said to my male colleagues who were, having a tumbler of whiskey at the podium. All of a sudden I had to conduct myself in this very proper, really almost advanced for my age way, just to be taken slightly seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were things that I learned early on. And, part of writing this book was really sitting in a meeting once where I had at this point probably taken 1,000 auctions. I was taking 100 auctions a year for the first 10 years that I did this. And someone said to me, well, we're going to put the auction after dessert. And I had been on stage 1,000 times. So I knew if you took an auction late in the evening, typically it doesn't go as well as if you do it earlier when people are not absolutely drunk and ready to go home. If you do it at the beginning when there's energy, you get energy from the crowd. And so I said to them, well, I don't think that we should put the auction at the end anymore. I think we should put it earlier in the program. And there was sort of this audible gasp from the committee. And I said, this is the point where I felt like I had enough confidence to know what I was doing on stage. And I knew that they wanted me to take the auction. And I said, because I don't take auctions after dessert. So if you'd like to have someone take the auction after dessert, I would be happy to find another auctioneer, but I'm just not going to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me was really the moment where I realized I had mastered this skill. I was the best. I was teaching all the auctioneers for the Christies at that point. And it was time for me to tell them how it should work instead of being told what I should do. And that felt great. What a moment,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So powerful. I would imagine walking out of that room, and you completely changed the landscape of how auctions run from there on out, right? Like you at some point set the stage, if you will, and you decided that was the best thing for the organizations that you guys were representing. And then I'm sure after that, people started to follow suit because they saw how successful that worked.
Absolutely. And I think it only takes one time where it goes well and you have your case study. It really only takes one win for anything in life. Once you show that it worked, people will follow. And so that was such a moment for me. And, sort of at the end of the book, I talk about technology in the auction world. And it's so funny now reading that because certainly that's what we've all had to default to. But talk about having a similar moment with this massive organization in San Francisco. And I love the leadership there. And they'd really gone to the devices, well, you're going to go on stage, Lydia, and you're going to tell everyone to pick up the device and give on the device. And, they had huge fundraising goals the next year and it hadn't gone as well as they'd hoped the year before. And I said, let me do it the way I know how to do it. If I can connect with the audience on a personal level, it is different. I promise you. And the CEO, God bless him, there were huge revenue targets. And not only did we hit them, we exceeded them.
Right.
We exceeded them.
Yeah.
So again, it's all of those things, all of those building blocks to give you the confidence you need to stand up on your own 2 feet and be sure in your voice is really the reason I wrote this book.
Right. Along the path, before you had gotten to that place in that meeting where you felt confident to stand there and say, this is how I think it should go, did you ever feel that sense of what's now, pretty commonly called like imposter syndrome? Did you ever feel out of place or like, what am I doing here? I'm getting so much resistance oftentimes. I'm getting kind of like what people are kind of qualifying as like maybe the bottom of the barrel. What, like, did you ever feel any of that?
A lot, really a lot. And especially in the times when I felt like I had grown so much into this skill and I felt so confident on stage, and yet I was still being questioned by committees that had been formed, a week before. And I would sit through a barrage of questions about whether I was going to be able to handle a certain situation. And I'm sitting there thinking, are you kidding? I've been able to do this. Now I've been doing it for 16 years, and I really would be surprised if there is anything that could happen to me on stage that hasn't happened to me. I mean, microphones that just are not there when you show up for an auction, people literally having heart attacks in the middle of the plates dropping, cell phones ringing. I mean, I had been through everything that could possibly happen on stage. And I think of it as such a gift because that gives you the arsenal from which to have those conversations. But, even earlier on when I felt like I knew how to navigate these situations, I would still have to sit in these really what felt like infuriating meetings a lot of the time where I would have to almost bite my tongue so that I wasn't thought of as being too brusque or, coming across as somebody who was too assertive. And then after that meeting where I sort of said that, I don't take auctions after dessert. After that, I just realized, they said okay, which meant they were willing to listen to what I had to say. And why hadn't I been willing to say it before? Because of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. But
finding
I think
voice.
part of it, I think sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it, right?
Right.
I mean, because at the top, why is the CEO the CEO? I'm sure that CEO probably had a lot of moments where they just forged ahead with what they thought was right. And sometimes that's the best way to do it.
Yes, absolutely. That was certainly the case for me as a CEO in my previous career. I was 30 and a CEO and was like, I've never been a CEO, but don't tell anybody. Like, not, it's just like this thing where it's just like, I mean, I've never done this. I feel very qualified to speak to a lot of these things. I know I have what it takes, but also so much of that for me as well. And what you're speaking of is like, you just find your resources, you find your people, you find your community, you figure out what you don't know, and you just go for it, and you just keep going for it and course correct as you make it happen.
Absolutely.
Continuing on in your career, I want to talk about when you essentially like created a new job for yourself, where you're within this organization, this big organization, and you had this sense of like ownership and this vision, and you saw a need and you wanted to create an entire department of Christie's that didn't exist. Will you talk to us a little bit about kind of where that came from, like the courage to go out there and go get what you want, essentially?
Yes. I think it is one of those things. I truly believe that my brain works in this way. I mean, I feel like I just did this during COVID, and I'll tell you a little bit about that after this. But, as it pertains to strategic partnerships, I talk in the book about the fact that during the recession, which, I think on a micro scale is similar to what we're going through right now, just economically, but obviously we weren't in a global pandemic then. So that's a little bit different.
Yes.
At the time, I was working in events, and I remember having this conversation with a woman who had a round table of people from the firm. There were 10 of us there. And at that point, I was working 11 and a half months out of the year. I was never leaving. I was working so much overtime, all of it unpaid. It was just, we were salaried employees and no one was making any money. And so I really felt like, someone had to understand how hard it was to be at work, 12, 13, 14 hours a day for 11 and a half months out of the year, and nobody was listening. And I remember sort of saying this to her in this round table, and she said, Lydia, the bottom line is you can talk about it, you can cry about it, doesn't matter. What do the numbers say? And until you're bringing in money, people are not going to take you seriously. And it really stuck with me because one thing we'd been doing at that point were site rentals, sort of renting out our space for events, but also sponsorships. And sponsorships now are, you see partnerships everywhere. I mean, who doesn't do a partnership with someone else? It's a great way to cross promote. It's a great way if you have half of the marketing dollars to actually make a splash. I mean, you even see it on social all the time. People are constantly doing partnerships. But 10, 11 years ago, partnerships were not really something that a lot of people did. Certainly at Christie's, we never wanted anyone to think we didn't have money to do things. So
Sure.
we wouldn't partner with anyone, I mean, how horrible, right?
Right.
I saw it as a potential revenue stream. And so really the idea had been sitting with me for a long time. And, I talk about this in the third chapter of the book, really talking also about not being paid and not being compensated.
Mm-hmm.
And the two things kind of hit at the same time. So I found out that I was making a third of what I should have been making on the open market from a friend, a third, not a half, a third. And on top of that, I also realized that I was done with my job. I didn't want to do the kind of work that I'd been doing. I had done so many events, and while I loved them, I was just exhausted, and I was ready to try something new. I think this happens to me every 10 years. There's something that happens. I wrote my book.
Yeah.
20 years into my career, all these things that kind of happen after 10 years. And so I basically, as you can read in greater detail in the book, I went into my boss's office and told him that I was leaving. I wasn't leaving because I had a job offer. I did not have a job offer. And it was such a critical time in the events season that if I had left, I think he probably would have lost his mind. And he knew that. And I knew that. And interestingly, I didn't go in there with that intent. I went in there to sort of say something that seemed like I was going to maybe leave, but I felt like I might as well just leave it on the table. And I really was not leaving. So I want to be clear, like I had no intention of ever leaving, but I figured, maybe I could make something happen.
Sure.
And at that point that he finally said what I had been waiting 10 years to hear, which was, what can we do to make you stay? And I saw that as the moment to pitch a new department. If you want me to stay, this is what it's going to take. And luckily for me, it was the perfect time for something like this because we needed revenue to offset our events. And in addition to that, it was a perfect time to begin negotiating because they knew if I was gone in 2 weeks, there was really no one else to execute against everything we had planned. So that for me was that amazing moment in my career where all of a sudden I understood the power of not only what it means to ask for money and get it, but how important that would be in the rest of my life. And in addition to that, it gave me the opportunity to start strategic partnerships, which has been such a fun ride ever since.
Yeah. In that part of the book, I literally was cheering like, yes, 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 like during that entire journey. And for our listeners here, we have a mixture of female business owners and then women that are within an organization that are working their way in their career, leveling up their leadership. They're looking for different ways to expand and grow themselves. And I love that all of the principles that you've laid out just now, and then even in more detail in the book, are relevant to both sides. It just speaks to us as women to be able to really lean into, understand, like, what is it that's really calling us, what would light us up, what do we want, and we need to go ask for it. And sometimes that is just asking ourselves for permission to go do. And sometimes that is going to other people to create a new department or get paid more, or just different parts of your job that you just really shouldn't be doing, or you're overworked, or whatever the case may be. And everybody needs to get the book and read that part in great detail because it's such a good message. And I'm just so thankful that we get to talk about that and show that as a model to our listeners here today. It's just perfect. I literally was saying yes. I was like reading the book like, yes.
It's so funny. I cried so much when I wrote that chapter. I mean, I cried when I was reading it for the audiobook too, which was kind of funny to the people outside of the booth. I'm sure they were thinking, this isn't that profound. But it was so emotional for me because I think money really always feels tied in some ways to you as a person. Like, do people think you're worth it? Will they pay for you to do it? And what I have learned since then, which I hope every single person who is listening to this will understand and remember for the rest of your life, is that money is not personal. Money is business. And so I'm sure, like a lot of people this year, there are a lot of people who are listening who've been laid off or have taken pay cuts. I personally took a pay cut. So I can tell you, like, it happens across every industry. 2020 was a really tough year. But the bottom line is you have to ask for money. Right. And even when I was being told I was going to have to take a pay cut, I was still negotiating. I was still asking for things, because if I hadn't asked and I just taken it and walked away, I would have felt terrible about it.
Right.
By asking, I felt like I was at least going through the process. And so I make a point to always ask for more comp. It doesn't matter what the year's been like, because if there's money on the table, someone is going to get it. It might as well be you.
Yeah. Yeah. And just the activity of advocating for yourself, just at least, right? So I want to dive into the book now, like the actual, there's a few like notes and things that I have here that while so much of the book is underlined for myself, I wanted to pull out a couple of just key things and then again, encourage everybody to go get the book, because it's just
buy the book.
Full of so many things. Go buy the book. Just get it. So I want to talk about the chapter where you talk about the power of community. And that is something that has been very important for our community here. Pre-COVID, we were able to have in-person events. We were able to be able to connect with each other. We were, just have that, the power, like you say, of that community. And laying out also the right community for you is just so profound. And I think that oftentimes on at least our community, their journey is confusing when we get to that place where we might have people that have been close to us in the past that don't understand our reasonings, why we're going out and getting more, or we're looking for kind of an expanded experience of this world. And the part that I've underlined here is the part where you start to talk about there will always be people who won't be able to handle your success. And frankly, you don't need them to believe in you, because starting today, you're going to be your biggest supporter and believer in you. Can we unpack that for a little bit and talk about where that came from for you and why you chose to write about that in the book?
I think this is the most important thing that women need to understand. A lot of your success can be because of the people you surround yourself. And the inverse of that is also true. If you have people who are feeding into the doubt and the negativity that you are putting out there about yourself, then guess what? There you are. You are not going anywhere, because you need to surround yourself with people who, when you are having a weak moment, are there to support you and say, no, I'm sorry. This is not a bad day for you. This is a pause, and tomorrow you will be back. And tomorrow you're going to be going after that thing we have talked about, because that is the kind of support that you need around you. And the reason I really wrote this was because I'd experienced it in my own career. I think in my 20s, I probably was that person to people as well. There is jealousy. Sure. Jealousy is a real emotion, just like anything else. And I often say to people, like, when I feel jealous about someone or something that I've seen, I sit with that emotion and I think through it. And then I think to myself, okay, if I'm jealous, what could I do to achieve that kind of success in my own life? What is going to make me as happy as that person appears to be, or is going to allow me to achieve something that I see as a hugely beneficial thing in my life, the way that this person sees that in theirs. So a lot of this book I wrote real time. So you have a third child, I have a third child. I wrote this book in 3 months when my last baby was not even a year old. So I basically wrote it. She turned 1 in March. I was still nursing her. I was still taking charity auctions at night. I was traveling constantly. I was wiped. And then I write a book on top of this in 3 months. So I had a deadline of April 1st. It had to be done by April 1st. And so a lot of the information, I'm such a social animal. I found that when I was out doing dinners with friends, seeing people that I knew, walking through the streets of New York pre-COVID when there were people here, those things actually helped me write. And I remember being at dinner in the East Village with a group of women who were friendly, not like best friends. And I brought up this topic. And I said, okay, can I ask you guys something? What would you want me to write on? And the topics sort of were flying back and forth. And the woman sitting next to me said, what's always really just made me feel horrible? She has a small pajama line that she started out of her home. Her husband is wildly successful, would never need to work. And one of her friends, she overheard her say, well, X, she's always peddling her wares. And she said she went home and cried and cried and cried and cried.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then first of all, you should cry because that's a horrible compliment that made you feel bad and sad, and go with that emotion, feel that emotion. But then once you're past that, remember who that friend is to you. She's jealous. She's jealous of your success. And you know what you want to do with someone like that? You want to bring them along for the ride and make them your supporter, because that person is lacking something that you have. And if you isolate them and push them away and never talk to them again, they will continue that. If you show them the way, you don't have to make them your supporter, but you include them in things and you bring them into things and you show them what success looks like, maybe she will feel confident to start something like you have started. And so that's really what I mean by this. It's like your supporters, I mean, you know who those people are. For me, it was people who I was on the book tour and I would have a moment of weakness and they would write in all caps, like, you are doing this for us. You are doing this for your daughters. Get out there, get on that plane. Your kids are fine. We'll pick them up. Like those types of people. Yeah. That's your mentorship group. That's your group. And then you have the other people in your life who maybe they couldn't handle your success. You don't need them to handle your success. You can bring them along for the ride if they're there to take it. And if not, then they can go wherever they want. It's of no concern to you. So just remember that. Like, people can always be there for the bad times. It's people who are there for the good times. Those are the people who are your supporters.
Yeah. It's such an important message for us all to really remember, because that message can fly out of our brain so quickly when we're in the middle of it. Is there anything that you did throughout your journey that kind of helped you center back in that, and remind yourself of that instead of kind of go down the spiral of just feeling the weight and the heaviness of almost like that burden of feeling that from somebody else and then feeling like you're doing something wrong and needing to change or course correct? How do you kind of bounce back out of that?
I really let that emotion go, because as I said, if I see somebody who I know is not going to be saying the greatest things about something I'm doing, or if I hear something, I reach out to that person immediately. I try to make contact and I try to bring them into the fold. And if it doesn't work, I feel like I'm okay letting that go for a bit. Because life's long. I mean, that's the other thing. We all know it. You know, I feel like in my 20s, there were mistakes I made as a manager, as a friend that, 5-10 years later, they come back down in a totally different way. That person comes back into your life. And so the things that I think, especially in your 20s and early 30s, you can get into those sort of nitty gritty relationships that have all that cattiness or all that infighting. You can also let that go and be okay with it.
Yeah.
Because there is a chance that, maybe someone was married and someone was unmarried. So maybe somebody was living the life that they always wanted to live, and you're married and you have 3 kids and you're at home and that's not the life you have, and that's tough. Like, everybody has a different perspective of what success looks like. And sometimes it's hard for people to handle if the success in their life is not what they want it to be and you have that. So I always think that it's good to come from a place of kindness at the core. And then the other thing I would say is just show up. Show up for your friends. If you see that they're in a bad place, reach out to them. Don't let them go into that bad place and stay there. Someone's being mean or horrid, there's a reason. There's something that they are happy about. So offer that hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next part of the book that I'd want to go into, as some people might be listening to this and thinking, like, how does she possibly have all the time to do all of these things that she is talking about? And as I was reading along, I was also like, yeah, how is this all happening? Like, this is impressive. And then I got to the chapter about the most powerful woman in the room creates a roadmap and follows through. Can you unpack just kind of like the brief overview of that, and then maybe even go into a day in the life of?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a day in the life in 2020 looked very different than a layout.
Sure. Yes.
I can go into both of those. So create a roadmap and follow through. I do this every year. I mean, if I actually don't think I have my notebook in here, I would show you, but I write down my goals for the year. Every single one of them at the beginning of every year. And I write them in pencil because a lot of times I have to erase them. And sometimes there are different trees that come out of them. But I take a picture and I send it to my best friend. And I'm like, just so you know, this is what I'm doing this year. What are you doing? And she does the same thing. Sometimes for her, it's verbal. She'll just tell me. But for me, it is literally writing it down. So I found in 2019, the list of things that I was going to do in 2019. I mean, excuse me, in 2020. I feel like I've forgotten the year 2020.
Yeah.
Definitely write a book was in there. I was going to write a book in 2020 and I didn't get around to it. But guess what is top of my list? And I'm working on the proposal now, a book. So just because you write it doesn't mean that it has to happen on your timeline. And frankly, it's life. So things erupt and there's a chance that it won't. But don't ever think that writing something down isn't holding yourself accountable. And if you want that extra layer, send it to your best friend. And if you really want that layer, put it on Instagram. So everyone can. But that's what a roadmap is. And so, when you say, what does a day in the life look like? Because I remember with my editor, when I sent in the first version of the book, she said, I'd love to understand what your day looks like. How does it work? Because there are so many components to it. And really, again, 2019 is different than 2020.
Sure. Yeah.
Certainly. But, for me, it was always about, I always look at life through the prism of, I want to be there for my kids as much as possible. I'm a working mom. I have really two jobs, my job during the day, I have my job during the night. And I have all of these other things, like I want to be a good friend for my friends. I want to be able to do these things that I want to do. So how at this point can I be as present as possible for my children at the times when it matters the most? So I really go, especially in busy times, I make a list of what the day looks like. So I want to be at home by 5 o'clock. What does that look like? I need to leave the office by this time, which means if I back into my day, what are the things that I need to have accomplished by the time I walk out of the door at 4:45 in order to be home by 5? And then if I have to take a charity auction that night, what do I need to have done by the time I leave my house at 9 o'clock at night to be able to get out of the door and feel like I'm not going to lose my mind when I have to get on stage at 9:30? And I really write it down. And again, just like the roadmap, sometimes there are things that get pushed to the next day, certainly. Sometimes there are things that get pushed to the weekend, but I always have a plan for what the day looks like, because then I know I can check the boxes of the things that are the most important, and the things that aren't, sometimes they get bumped. Sometimes they get bumped for 6 months,
Right.
That's the way it works. And I think that allowing yourself to do that gives you the opportunity to find time for the other things that you want to do as well. So, I think by having some structure, even in the days when during COVID, there was no structure really, like we were homeschooling our kids. We were in Colorado when New York shut down. So we ended up staying there. And so I literally would make a schedule for each of my children. And I would make a schedule for myself, and I would make a schedule that was sort of all of the kids combined next to my schedule, so I could sort of keep that going. But then I also carved out time to think about what else I wanted to do with this time, because I realized this is a pause that won't last forever. So I started an Instagram live series, and I did that every day for 2 months, Monday through Friday, every single afternoon. And it was 20 minutes. So everybody knew exactly when it was taking place. But that gave me sanity. It made me feel like I was continuing to speak on this platform that I loved speaking on for so long. And as a result of that, during that time, I started noticing that there were all of these questions that people would ask about certain things, or I would get DMs. So at the end of the summer, I started a masterclass series where I basically addressed these 4 things that I kept getting questions about. And then since then, I've been doing a ton of speaking. So when people say to me, like, why do you do all this stuff? I'm like, because action always leads to action.
Right.
If I sit and do nothing, then nothing happens. And I'll say too, Heather, like on a day when you're feeling, or to any of your listeners, when you're feeling, nothing's happening. Like nothing's really happening. Like my business isn't growing. I don't feel like I'm meeting anyone. I'm not getting any offers to do anything. What do you need to do? Take action, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to start those cold calls. You need to reach out to your contacts. Like you create the action you want in your life. So if you're stuck in a rut, you're the only person who can get yourself out of that.
Yes. So everybody needs to take action today. Go buy the book. Take the action. Read the book.
On your bookshelf. Looks great on it.
It does. I have a whole little library over here, and it stands out so beautifully because of this amazing, vibrant color that it is. And it's just, it was so fun to get this in the mail from my Gran. Thanks again, Gran. I know you listen, so thanks again.
Well, the funny thing is, I was traveling so much when I was writing the book that when they came to me to ask about the book cover, there were 2 books that I would see in every bookshelf on every single airport. The only thing you'd see was the Jen Sincero books
Yeah.
that you were badass, because it was sort of acid green and bright yellow. And
Yes.
there was one, The Subtle Art of Not Giving I won't swear.
Yes.
Like a vibrant orange. And
Yeah.
I remember saying when we were going back and forth about the book cover, they kept saying to me, well, we were thinking white. I know you want to do pink and red. And I was like, no, it has to be hot pink, because I want it to look good. I want it to be pretty. And then my entire book tour, I dressed in bright pink and red the whole time.
Yeah.
It was so fun.
Perfect. So the whole brand ensemble. I love it. I am so sad we're running out of time. I could go through like 50 other questions. I am excited to have this time with you. One thing that I want to ask, I typically try to ask our guests the same couple of questions at the end of the interview so that our listeners can kind of hear those takeaways. I'm changing that up this year because of what's happened in 2020. So my question for you is this: you're the first person to answer this, and you're kicking off this question series for us today. What did you leave behind in 2020, and what lessons are you bringing forward with you into the new year?
I left behind in 2020 any small piece lacking confidence in my personality. I'm done with it. Life is too short. Isn't that what we learned in 2020? And it could change at any moment. So you have to take every advantage you can. So any doubt, any hesitation I had about anything stays in 2020. And 2021 for me is always remembering the things that are most important, like family, friends, colleagues who I'm close with. All of those things come first, and everything else is the backseat. Period. End of sentence. And that's it.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. I love that. Tell us where the best place is to find your book. Where can we go purchase it today?
Well, you can always purchase it on Amazon, but if you have a bookseller, I'm a huge bookstore person. So if there's a bookstore that you absolutely love, order it through them. There are some amazing bookstores in every town in the entire world, but I do love the Strand in New York City. It's such a beautiful place to go, and they always have my books, so you can always call and order it there. So
excellent.
And you can always, it's always on Amazon as well, or you can order it through, if you come to my Instagram and you DM me and you want to send me your book, you can do that too, and I'll personalize it for you.
Ooh, that's awesome. I like that. So you're on Instagram. Tell us where your website. Are you on any other platforms? Where else can we connect with you?
So Instagram is my love. I think it's so fun. And if you really want to come along for the ride, I'm always doing something, which is evidenced on Instagram. You will see that. I am on Facebook, obviously, but usually just my Instagram posts go to Facebook, and then LinkedIn. If you have any business-related questions or have any speaking or masterclass questions and you want any kind of coaching or anything, that's where to find me. All of my tags are the same, Lydia Fenet. I think I might be the only person with my name. So it's very helpful because I get all of the names. And then I have a website, which is lydiafenet.com.
Excellent. We'll link all that in the show notes so that our listeners can just click and take a follow. Thank you so much for being here today, Lydia. It was great to have you.
Such a pleasure. And stay safe, everyone. And thank you again, Heather, for the opportunity.